Good morning, everybody. Ivan Temelkov here. Welcome to the RAS Project, episode 98, with yours truly. This is a podcast where we talk about life, entrepreneurship, personal development, family, tech, and marketing. Again, yours truly, Ivan Temelkov, and I'm your host. And we have a very special episode today. And before we jump into that, I also want to introduce my lovely co-host, Courtney Turner. Good morning, Courtney.
Morning. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. So it's Friday. I can't believe that it's Friday. This week it has like completely just flown by, is what it seems like.
Yep. It does seem that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So, I want to go ahead and introduce our guest who we have today. And before I bring him in, just wanted to read his quick bio. His name is Mohammed Asif, and he is a serial entrepreneur, investor with background in finance, having grown an international consulting business and removed himself from day-to-day operations. He now focuses on investing in great businesses and entrepreneurs. He also massively believes in giving back and is about to launch a charity foundation with his wife that focuses on children's education and empowerment of women. Born and raised in Pakistan, he immigrated to the UK at the age of 17 with a suitcase and 2,000 pounds, which were then stolen from him. Along with the suitcase, he slept on the streets, did 4 jobs, and got by to put himself through university, all while still helping his family back home. And he became a millionaire before the age of 30. Good morning, Mohammed. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I'm wonderful. How are you?
Doing pretty good. So I was getting very excited there as I was reading your bio because I can so much, relate to it from an immigrant standpoint specifically. And so with that being said, let's start off with that. Let's talk a little bit about you. Take us back to, the 17-year-old Asif, and tell us a little bit about like what enticed you to even, immigrate to the UK? Like, how did that all come together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started off a little bit earlier from 17 years of age. I wanted to be a cricketer, back home, this is a major sport. We often joke and say it sort of runs in our veins. It's a properly cricket crazy country. And I was pretty good at it from a very young age. Unfortunately, as it happened, my dreams were shattered when I had a pretty horrific accident at the age of 10 and broke my leg in really in a bad way. And I was told by surgeons and doctors that unfortunately professional sport is probably going to be very, very difficult, next to impossible. So, life had its own sort of plans for me as opposed to just being a professional sportsman. So whilst I was recovering in the hospital from this operation and injury, I watched a talk show. And the host on the talk show was talking actually about finance and how basically a proper understanding of finance can help change the world and eliminate poverty. Now, I grew up in a developing country. And so from a very young age, I was very sensitive to feeling other people's pain and seeing all those injustices. And this just resonated. So I thought, okay, well, if I'm not going to be a cricketer, this is what I'm going to do. Unfortunately, though, if you're born in an Asian family, your options of becoming when you grow up is either to become a doctor or an engineer, as your parents want you to do. My dad was a very successful civil engineer, and he wanted me to do that. And I said, that's not going to happen. He then actually threatened to say, I'm not going to pay for your uni. And I said, fine, don't. I'm going to study finance, and I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to England to do it. And so basically, I cobbled together a couple of grand from some friends, and the rest of the money Dad reluctantly lent me. So I decided to jump on a plane and came here in search of A, to prove myself that I can do this, B, for a better life, and C, get to a certain level and then give back and help people.
Right. That's a very interesting story. As you were saying that, your family had expectations of you, because I think, as an immigrant, is just that, And I can totally relate that in a way. It's because, I think my parents had certain expectations for me to do certain things. And let's just say that I failed them miserably by like totally not doing anything or even remotely of what they had expectations for. And so, but what was real interesting in your story, like you said, is that, so you immigrated to the UK, right? And you had some cash, but then, you get robbed. So like, when you get robbed, like what's going through your mind at that time? Like can you remember going back to the age of 17? Like what was your reaction at that time? Can you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing was that I was a little bit shocked, and I didn't actually believe that happened because, you sort of hear stories that you come to England, it's a sort of a gentleman-like country, and none of this sort of stuff is ever going to happen, and everybody's going to look after you and so on. But, I used to call these years sort of challenging years and tough years because I had to sleep rough and all that. But
Right.
later in life, I realized that these were the growth years. All these storms and challenges helped me become a better person who I am today. I think there were actually two things that really, in fact, I'd say actually there were three things that I can go back, I can transport myself back to that time and still feel those emotions that I was going through. The very first one was an unwavering belief that despite all of this, I'm still going to do this.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to call dad again and say, oh yeah, I think you were right, maybe that's what I should have done. And so there's a thing that you have to look in yourself in the mirror and say, look, I gave it my best shot, and until I'd done that, this wasn't okay for me. So the belief for me was very essential. And I think the second thing was an attitude of gratitude. Now, coming from a developing immigrant country, this was still a huge thing for me, that I could still eat and so on. And I think the third thing really, and this was hugely strengthening, was my mother's smile. I mean, I can still see that. I close my eyes and I see, and it just used to give me that extra push, that extra strength that was needed to get through those tough times.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting when you were sharing that is because you said growth years, that you realized later on that these were like the growth years, because I think that when you kind of fall in that situation, most people's instant reaction is fear and chaos, and they feel disoriented, they feel lost, they don't know how to react. And it's interesting that, you said that these were like the growth years, because I think that thinking back to that 17-year-old when you were robbed, that was probably the one time in your life where you were forced to think the most strategically, to think like, okay, oh shit, what now? What am I going to do now? Like, I'm lost. I've got nothing. Right. And I think, with what's happening right now in the world too, is that I think a lot of people kind of, feel lost, I almost feel like they're almost unwilling to think strategically and creatively, for themselves, to understand that, what, maybe there's nobody coming to save you. The only person that's going to save you is you from yourself. And you have to figure out, what that looks like. And that's what you did, right? Is like you figured out, okay, I've got two options. One is fall into self-pity and dwell on this loss, or two, figure out what am I going to do next. So what did you do next? How did you escape that situation?
Yeah, I think, by the way, what you said there is very true, and that's exactly it. My mother used to say that your story about rain is going to direct your life. So what that means is that if you're two people standing in the rain would have different understanding and the way of explaining it. One person could say, well, this is just wonderful, I can feel the rain touch my face and the breeze, and it's just a wonderful experience. The other person would be saying, oh my god, my life's miserable, I hate this, and all that sort of stuff, especially in England, by the way, with it raining all the time. But so your story about rain directs how you live your life, and for me, this was a growth opportunity. I think what I decided to do was to say, right, I have firm belief in my own ability. Until and unless I've given it the absolute best shot, I'm not giving up. So let's wake up and start to do this. I end up remembering, I think I had 32 pounds left in my pocket, and only the clothes that I was wearing, and that's about it. And no place to stay as such. And having to do all of that, and then eventually nobody would believe me because my passport was also lost, because that was part in the suitcase. I reluctantly put it there because I thought that would be the safest place. And then people wouldn't believe me that I'm a legal immigrant. They would say, well, who are you? How do you prove yourself? And so I had to find work. I think the key was thinking strategically to say, right, money, because that's the first step. I need to ensure that I have enough to get by and eat and so on. And so started looking for work. And because nobody would believe that I'm a legal immigrant, they would pay me less than minimum wage. And it was like lots of jobs that would give me £1 an hour. But again, immigrant mindset, you'd say, I'm going to do it, no problem. Because if the good days hadn't, if they didn't survive, the bad won't either. So yeah, I found 4 different jobs that would pay me, I think, cumulatively about £10
What
for the day or so.
What type of job?
Well, one of them was working in a vegetable market. One of them was stacking shelves and mopping floors. And then I'd go to university in the meantime too, by the way. That was one thing that I did not let go of. I said, I'm absolutely going to ensure that I still put myself through uni, because that is going to give me the competitive edge. And then in the nights, I would do sort of securities out in the streets with, sort of looking after the fountains and all that sort of stuff. So the drunk people wouldn't go and bash those things about. And that circle would continue. I mean, I'd literally have the chance to sleep on the bus. That's it.
Yeah.
The whole year just sort of went by like that.
As Courtney was asking the question around what kind of jobs you were doing, right? I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is just that when you reach success and fame and wealth, whatever that looks like, because I think most people are attributed to money, really, with success and wealth, is just that I think they tend to forget that, there was a point in time in my life that I used to do odd jobs. Yeah. And it's almost like, they forget how to be humble, how to be grateful, because honestly, I know a lot of people that, have reached, goals and dreams beyond their wildest dreams ever. And they never forget where they came from. And those are the people that I have the biggest respect from. It's just that, as the saying goes, that, treat the janitor in the same way that you treat the CEO. That's huge, because most people nowadays, there's a lot of people that will treat the CEO differently than they treat the janitor, because like they've developed this egocentric mentality that they're above everybody else because their status quo has changed. And I think that those are the people that are very shallow, I think, to me, is because they forget where they came from. So it's interesting when you were talking about these odd jobs that you did, because it sounds like you still have that the humbleness, that gratitude, and realizing that, like, never forget where you came from, because we all started somewhere. We all did odd jobs. We all had to, strive for survival before we got to where we are today. And it's really like when you say you were sleeping on the bus, like most people don't understand that, like, you were still living. In fact, that was probably one of the most vigorous times in your life. Like, you were living, you were alive, you were energetic, you were proactive. And like, that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that even when you reach a certain level in entrepreneurship or life, to where it's like money in the bank, you got the dream house, the dream cars, maybe you're married, you got kids, like, you got it all, right? Like, even then you're still doing odd shit. In fact, those are the times that you're still, like, talking to the janitor, or might even do odd jobs, like, put up the wet floor sign in the mall or something if you walk by. Like, when I see people like that are like, of status quo, and they're living their life and they've achieved goals and dreams, I'm like, holy shit, man. Like, these are humble people. There's still humble people left in this world that are not overlooking others because they have a status quo. So it's really humbling to hear that. I want to shift the convo a little bit to, one thing that you mentioned here, in your bio too, is this, that, you're very organized with your thoughts and perseverance and having that immigrant mindset and being very solution oriented. I want to talk a little bit about being solution oriented. How do you arrive to, like, being solution oriented? How do you, tackle problematic situations, and how do you come up with solutions, to rectify those situations?
I think the very first thing here to say, and the essence of it really, is the entrepreneurship actually means solving real world problems. That's it. I mean, that's what entrepreneurs do. They change agents. They look at a problem and they find a way to solve it. And the reason that happens, and really for me, number one point of that, is the fact that you can sit down and think about it. So when you start to, and by the way, mental activity is not thinking. I see this all the time these days. You know, you talk to the younger generation, particularly, or people that are continuously on social media and just flicking things through mindlessly. And I often say, well, aren't you sort of, why don't you do some constructive thinking? And the answer is, well, I am. Yes, but mental activity is not thinking. Thinking is when you really slow everything down, go into that really peaceful, serene place inside, and tap into that higher vibration, that higher energy that's all around us, and ask the right question, right? Because the answer is always there, but you have to start asking the right question. That's why wise people are always asking the right questions. That's one thing. And the other thing I think I heard from, I think, Tony Robbins, he said that there's no lack of resources, it's just resourcefulness, right? So whatever's around, you need to make use of it. And again, you know, I go back to my beginnings, which keep me grounded really, is that, you know, back home when things aren't available, you have to make it work. And so you know, it's sort of, you can train yourself to do that. And I realized that as soon as you start to organize your thoughts in a certain way, solutions just start to follow, because it forces you to ask the right questions.
Yeah. Well, one thing that you said that really got me is asking the right questions. That really, you know, stood out to me because, and you were speaking of social media, you know, someone like me who being in the digital space for 26 years is that, I mean, I remember the day Facebook started. I remember the day MySpace started. I remember the day like AOL was popular and I was popping, you know, my dial-up internet CDs. And this was like high school days when I should have really been doing homework or something more educational. I was like dicking around on the computer. But you know, what's real interesting that you said is like social media, how people scroll. And so many people think that they're thinking strategically, but they're not asking the right questions. You know, they might have good intent, but they're not asking the right questions. Yeah. And the right questions, I think, to ask the right questions is that you need to have the knowledge and education and experience to know what question to ask. And the reason I'm saying this is because in being more self-aware about yourself and knowing what those questions are and how do they pertain to you in your reality. And Courtney and I have talked about this in a previous episode about, you know, realities, and the reality of things is that there's, you know, 3 different realities. In this case, actually, we're talking about 3 different realities. So Asif, your reality, there's Courtney's reality, and there's my reality. And actually there's a 4th one because there's the reality of the world of like how things in actuality are. And most people, in fact, I got into an argument with a family member recently, and it really got me thinking about like realities, right? And I think most people perceive reality as the way things are, right? Like in their own world, their own bubble. And that's the way that the world should be. They think that's the way that the world operates. No, that's not how the world operates. I hate to break it to you. And those are, I think, the people that are just not looking at things realistically, right? But when you were saying asking the right questions, I think it's a matter of like asking the right questions that pertain to you, to your reality, to your world. And why? I think it's because when you ask the right questions, you can get the right answers that pertain to you, that are going to be applicable to you. They're going to be applicable to your life, to your business journey, to entrepreneurship, right? Because if you're asking the wrong questions and then you're not getting the right answers, then you get frustrated. That's what happens with a lot of people, actually, believe it or not, because they're not asking questions. And social media is, look, I love social media. I really do. But I think social media is a lot of perspective and opinions for the most part. And people are not asking the right questions that really pertain to their own scenarios, to their own world. In fact, I've been trying to do more of this actually on Instagram when I publish content, is like ask the right questions that pertain to me. Only me, because I'm trying to get answers and input from other people. Courtney?
Yeah, so I'm curious, how do you find the right questions to ask?
Well, for me, I think there was a quote, I believe it's by James Allen. You know, he was a Victorian little author back at the turn of the century. He wrote a book called As a Man Thinketh, which, by the way, for me is my #1 read. If anybody wants a recommendation, that's the book you need to read. It will tell you all about thoughts and how to organize them. I think he said that until and unless thinking is linked with purpose, there's no intelligent accomplishment. So you've got to decide first of all, what your purpose is. Having gone through the last 17 years of my life, from starting literally from nothing when I came here, to now owning well over 17 businesses and growing an international and global business effectively, I came up with sort of a 6-step formula. And the number one thing on that is come up with your purpose. Have a big bloody vision. Because if you don't have it, any thinking you do is just going to be a bit of here and a bit of there, really.
Right.
So you're going to get that purpose. Once you have that, then you find that all the thinking that you do is more geared. It's almost like, I think the best example I can think of right now is a cement truck. If you're trying to build a pavement, there's a whole cement truck that comes full of cement. If you do not put any sort of mold around it, it will just go everywhere. But as soon as you put a mold into it, you can create this really nice, lovely walkway. It's the same with your thinking. As soon as you give it a mold to think through, with a purpose, you'll be able to organize them and therefore ask the right questions.
So for you, what was your purpose, and how did you find it?
I think the very first thing really for me was where I came from. As I said earlier in the program, that I've always been very sensitive to feeling other people's pain. And I wanted to be able to explain to people how they can change their lives, how you can alter it, and by being an example. Because, you can read a book, there's shed loads of mentors who tell you all sorts of stuff. But when you become an example and stand in front of somebody, that's a different answer, because they can actually really see and relate to you. Particularly as an immigrant, they can really relate to you.
Yeah.
I love Bill Gates, he's one of my heroes, but it's very difficult for people to relate to him. But a lot of people certainly from Pakistan, could quite easily relate to me. I was like them. I grew up in a normal, humble family and then decided to come over. And so my purpose was to build something up, and provide people with employment, and then get to a certain level where I can then provide sophisticated capital and mentorship to people, to entrepreneurs who are already helping other problems, helping the world solve other problems that are currently existing. So that was my big thing, to say, right, this is what I'm going to do, as opposed to just saying, yeah, I want £1 million. Once you've made it, that's it. Well, it can't be it. There's going to be something bigger, something higher. And ultimately what you find is that as you're on that journey, yes, the money and all that comes to you, and that's kind of okay, but it's who you become, right? 5 years ago, the problems I'm solving today, I couldn't have even dreamt of solving those 10 years ago. The problems I hopefully will be solving in 10 years, I can't think of today. And so I think that's the great thing about this.
Yeah. No, that's one thing I wanted to add to that, is Courtney asked about purpose, is that it's actually kind of ironic, because I was watching a video from Damon John recently, and it was talking about a moving target. You can't hit a moving target. You can, but it's extremely hard. And so the moving target is your purpose, or defining that purpose. And it's really important to define that purpose, because it's that driving factor. And I think in entrepreneurship specifically, too many people are swayed by the materialistic things in entrepreneurship, even some seasoned entrepreneurs that I've seen, because they're just chasing money. They're chasing, fancy cars. They're chasing big houses. They're chasing, big bank accounts, and I think there's only a few entrepreneurs out there who truly, like you said, 5-10 years ago, down the road, that they're still chasing the same purpose. Like the consistency factor behind chasing your purpose relentlessly, endlessly. That's really the key challenge here, is because, when you have a strong enough purpose, and this is something that I personally have struggled with, but once you find that purpose, you get up every morning invigorated, knowing that you have something that you're like pulling towards, something that's like bringing you. And regardless of whether you slept bad, or, you're aching because you worked your ass off at the gym the night before, you're still getting your ass up, because that purpose is driving you relentlessly. And that's how I feel every day, because I got a strong enough purpose and I know what I want. Go ahead, Courtney.
So I'm curious, because I think people have different beliefs on this. And I think that, absolutely, purpose is very motivating, and it's a great driving factor. I think it is the driving factor for human beings, but a lot of people really struggle to find it. And, I think some people believe, I personally actually don't believe that you just find it. It's not like, scavenger hunt and you find it somewhere, the pot of gold. I think that you created, I do believe in, free agency, and I don't think you created out of thin air. I think that there's a lot of experiences and your personal makeup that contribute to creating it. But I'm curious your thoughts on that and what your advice for people who are really struggling to find some sense of purpose.
I think my number one advice for that, and this is how I found it, is to wake up an hour or two earlier every day. Really, it does two things. One, it forces you to create a new habit, and ultimately, whenever you find your purpose, you will need to you'll need to change a few habits of how you've been living now in order to accomplish it. So what I used to do was, and I still do this today, to the day. Wake up an hour or two earlier compared to everybody else. And actually, for me, this was a relatively easy thing because back home, we all wake up very early in the morning for prayers and at 5 a.m. And so that's kept on with me even now, whether it's the weekend or not, I still wake up at 5. Come downstairs, make a nice cup of tea, grab a pen, not a computer, an actual pen, and start writing your thoughts. And what I realized would happen is that, I'd start jotting some thoughts down. Some days nothing would come. Some other days great inspiration would come. And slowly but surely, it just starts to build. What happens, you see, is in the process of creativity is that writing causes thinking. Thinking causes feelings. Feelings cause actions, and ultimately actions cause results. So really, my advice to anyone is wake up an hour early, whatever time you wake up now, just start to get up a bit earlier. And then, just with a clear mind, put your phones, everything away, just a fresh piece of paper every morning and a pen and start writing. That's one thing. And the other thing that will actually come out of this, which is super useful, is that you'll gain an extra 9 weeks in a year, 9 40-hour weeks. And if you use them correctly, it could give you the competitive advantage and edge. So what I did was I would take that time and get mentored. I was very fortunate to meet Bob Proctor and be enrolled on his program and sort of learn amazing stuff from it, which was frankly life-changing. But I used those extra 9 hours that are simply created by waking an hour earlier in order to help that.
That's amazing.
You said Bob Proctor, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to touch upon what you talked about waking up early. Obviously, if you don't know who Bob Proctor is, then, living under a rock, basically, for most people. But you what was really interesting about what you said is how you created more time. And what entrepreneurs actually don't understand is that, you win the day by waking up early. That's probably been a struggle and still is a struggle for me, is that there are some days, but most days doesn't happen. But you can win the day by waking up early because you get an advantage over everyone else. And when you do that consistently over time, you're creating more time. And it goes back to, work while they're sleeping, strategize while they're partying. And I think, well, personally for me is as I'm getting older, I'm 40 years old now, and I'm starting to realize that the shit I did in my 20s is no longer fun. It hasn't been for years. Not to mention is that it was expensive. So why not allocate that time to thinking about my business and thinking about my future and thinking about my family and building pillars that are actually going to create longevity to where 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I can just get up and say, you know what, I can go travel with my family for a month around the world and I can afford it. And I don't have any strings attached to do it. What's not, why wouldn't you be able to do that? There's fun in that, to go and travel, which by the way, anyone that's watching and listening too, is that if you don't travel outside of your city, of your state, or of your country alone, you haven't experienced. Because I think the cultural, once you experience different cultures, it really gives you a different perspective. And I think it also helps you build more gratitude, because I'm going to bring it back to being an Eastern European. I remember when McDonald's opened in Bulgaria, and my Bulgarian friends were so excited about the fact that they could go to McDonald's. And here we are in the United States, you can drive your ass through the drive-through and get a cheeseburger, it's nothing, so and by the way, I'm no longer a fast food junkie, but I was for a lot of my younger years. But the principle of that is that the accessibility that exists in countries that like the United States of America that in other parts of the world that doesn't. I remember when I got my driver's license at 16 and like my friends were like, wait, you got a driver's license at 16? Like I can't even get one for another 2 years. And that's even pending on whether or not I pass my driver's test, which by the way, back in Bulgaria, like at the age of 18, when you're taking like the driver's ed test equivalent, it's like literally, it's like signing away your kidney, basically, like what it feels like. So like, but that mentality is important to understand because suddenly it makes you more grateful, understand that, you know what, maybe I am more fortunate. And, you know, something that I actually wanted to bring up to that is in part of Courtney's story, which anyone watching and listening, go and check out Courtney's podcast too, the Courtney Turner podcast, because you know, when you realize that, you know, you got a pair of eyes, pair of ears, and 2 hands and 2 feet, and you're suddenly doing a lot better than everybody else, like everything else will work itself out. Yeah. You just need to be proactive. You need to be solution oriented, and you need to be more sensitive and appreciative about the things that you have, because you know what? There's people who are less fortunate than you out there. I can guarantee you that. And I think that's what, especially in entrepreneurship, that, like you said in the beginning, Asif, is that's, you know, entrepreneurship is really about, you know, creating solutions to problems. And if you're a problem solver, I mean, literally, you just apply yourself a little bit more, and suddenly you're a solution. You're a practitioner. You're helping people solve problems, and that can be the start of a business, of one business that helps you solve, you know, people's problems or one set of problems, you know. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand that and how that really all comes together, because to most people, especially youngsters, I mean, we see this on Instagram, right, every day. Like they're just like popping up and like trying to be overnight success, and you know, I'm gonna be the next, you know, a rapper or the next so and so, and it's like, nah. I mean, unless you were born with a silver spoon, maybe, but even then, you know, it's a long shot, right? So let's talk a little bit about, you know, so I want to talk more about, you know, entrepreneurship. I want to talk more about, you know, the consulting side of it. So you said, correct me if I'm wrong, 17 different businesses, right, is what you're currently involved in. Let's talk about a couple of those businesses and what do they do?
Sure, yeah. So thankfully, our portfolio currently ranges from health and fitness to technology businesses to furniture import and export, consulting. And we're in the process now of also focusing on getting a fund launched, which would basically provide seed capital for a lot of these amazing, clever ideas that are really popping up. I think COVID, in some respects, was great in getting creativity out, because sometimes you find that when your back is against the wall, that's when you have to start thinking creatively, and really some good stuff comes. So these days we're finding some amazing entrepreneurs, and so we decided that we should set up a nice fund to really help them get access to the capital, and actually then at the same time mentor them, because I always find that you can find capital, but you know, if you're not getting the right coaching, then you can blow it and all that sort of stuff. In terms of businesses, then, so currently, yeah, as I said, we've got a few things. So I want to talk about two in particular, and this is all part to do with my purpose in life, which was, you know, partly to have this empowerment of women sort of sorted. So we launched my personal trainer, who is an amazing woman called Daria Gambles. She specialized in pre and postnatal, and so realized that actually women, particularly when they're pregnant, they don't get the right support from a fitness perspective, or they themselves kind of let go and they say, "Oh, look, you know, I'm just going to be a mum now and whatever." Mm-hmm. And also from a postnatal depression point of view. So we'd been chatting, and we both knew kind of each other's strengths and weaknesses because she'd been training me for a couple of years. And I said to her, Daria, why don't you run your own business? And you know, would sort of help you get it launched and so on. So let's sit down, brainstorm the ideas. And I think within the space of sort of 6 months, we went from conceptualizing it properly to opening our own studio, which is now doing fabulously well. And we've helped lots of women at the moment, both from pre and postnatal perspective. And these days, because of COVID again, we started doing Zoom classes, and now we're going to be doing them all across the world, which is fabulous. Part of the other thing that we want to do is to launch a female pregnancy gym wear, where sort of they can. It's called contour. So the whole point is that women can still feel kind of sexy and great whilst they're pregnant still.
Yeah.
So that's one which is doing great. We also have another business. It's in tech, and what we realized was that this was a problem in Pakistan, or certainly in developing countries, and we again wanted to fix it, whereby we find again, this is cultural, that women, they go to school, they get amazing education, then they get married and they have kids, and then that's kind of goodbye to life, pretty much. Now we're just going to look after the kids for 10 years.
Yeah. Right.
Then they come out and they want to do something, but everything that they learned or studied is kind of already massively outdated. But they're very entrepreneurial, so they start their own boutique or fashion range or something, but unfortunately they don't have the access to markets like we do here in the West. So we decided to create something called Her Floor. It's called HER and Floor. So the whole point is that it's women only. We've got a community of about 83,000 women on it already. Again, fully funded by us, by ourselves. And we designed this technology whereby, you could be in Islamabad in one city, and if you create these amazing embroideries or paintings or clothes or whatever it may be, or shoes for that matter, you then have access to be able to sell to the other parts of the country as well. We aim to launch that in the GCC countries, which is Middle East and also India and so on, which is a major market. But, again, solving problems really for people, whereby these women couldn't get access to customers outside of the city that they were living in, but now they can, because we provided them with this platform. So if you're a buyer, it's free for you to join. If you're a seller, you pay a small subscription, but, it just opens up a huge domain for you. There's 215 million people in Pakistan alone, and 54% of them are women. So, it's a huge market. Yeah.
That's a huge number. One thing, as you were talking about these different businesses, because I wanted you to share, obviously, some of these businesses, because, I personally get excited about, different businesses when they get started, because they're solving a problem or multiple problems, out there in the world. And one thing that I came to mind is that the riches are in the niches. I just heard this recently, and as you were kind of describing, it is very niche, like you said, especially with women, which I had no idea that 54% of the population of Pakistan is women. That's a huge number, but that, women get education, and then it's kind of like almost they put their lives on hold because they prioritize motherhood. And I think, a lot of that happens, it's very frequent where, in marriages, it's like, you become a mother. It's like that's your calling, right? It's like, I'm going to be a mother, right? So like put your life on hold for 18 years or 15 years or however long, and not do anything with your education and, sacrifice, ideas. And it's like, so I think that's huge, that you guys are helping women, specifically being able to take that knowledge and be able to pursue it to start businesses, Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but I also wanted to add that the one side is the sacrifice and thinking that that's your calling and so on. I think the other side is that if you end up doing that and use the amazing creative ability that's been given to you and your entrepreneurship, you're also selling the world short. I mean, I think, Pakistan's probably not the only country with that demographic of women. I think just globally these days, there's probably more women around, which is awesome. But we want them to use their amazing skills and talents and abilities. So you don't want to be selling the world short either by not utilizing them.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And I actually thought about the Beyonce song. What is it? Women Run the World. I think it's something along those lines. But, you're absolutely right, because, looking at like social networks like Pinterest, is 90% of the audience is female, right? And females are usually the decision makers in households, so they always have an upper hand. But I think that the entrepreneurial community for a very long time has been predominantly ran by males. Women just haven't really, there's women entrepreneurs out there, obviously, Courtney being one of them too. And she's had an amazing career as well. But I feel like, when you look at the scales, it's like, males far greatly outweigh the entrepreneurial community. So we do need more women in the entrepreneurial space. And, I had a conversation a while back, actually, with another female entrepreneur that really got me thinking, that's relevant to this conversation, is that I think the fear factor is different. The risk factor for men and women is different when it comes to entrepreneurship specifically, because I think men just are, most men risk more, at least. And I think women are kind of like afraid, because it's that failure, at least that's a large portion, not all, but a large portion.
I think a lot of that's biological. I mean, men are much more wired to biologically take risks. If you think about them being the providers, the hunters, they're going out into the wild to hunt, that's a big risk. Whereas women, because they are the ones who bear children and usually are there to nurture and physically take care of the children, there is a security need for them. And so that's also why they typically look to men to be their protectors and providers. So I think there is a huge biological component. That's not to say that females can't be great entrepreneurs. But I think one of the things that I really love that you were saying is that you work with the creativity and the skills sets that they have. Because I think that we really need to honor and celebrate, how men and women are different and how they work together. Instead of trying, I think as a culture, it's kind of a global phenomenon that, we see this trying to mix gender roles. And I don't think that's productive at all. I think that women can contribute to the entrepreneurial space in, their own way. And I think that way has tremendous value. But, it should be theirs, and it should be, their feminine contributions as opposed to trying to fit into a male space per se, so
I think that's very true. I mean, you don't want to be in a position where you're just conforming, right? And you end up conforming by being something and somebody that you're not. You're a woman, and you should really celebrate that and bring that to foray. In fact, we find that men bring a different, from a risk profile perspective, they bring a different thing to the business. But I think women also bring something else. They bring the care, just a different perspective, really. And sometimes, as a result, you think that that's a better thought through decision than just saying, yeah, look, this is risky, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. Sometimes they just allow you that little time to think through things. And that's, sometimes the maternal instincts come through and they're great.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And actually, since we have a little bit more time, I want to kind of shift the conversation towards the personal development side of things, because that's obviously big, whether it's in life or on entrepreneurship. And want to get your thoughts, Asif, on personal development and some suggestions. Because and before we jump into that, actually, when you were talking about, men and women, how to differentiate in entrepreneurship, like the first thing I thought of is like, most males are like, let's crash and burn, let's give it all, right? And women are like, well, we can crash and burn, but let's like crash and burn in style.
Yeah.
Let's have a creative approach to it. Let's have a diligent approach to it. Like, I feel like, and you're absolutely right. And I think women add that creativity level to this. As well, that I think most men miss also. I mean, we've seen, I know that in recent times, over the last couple of years, when General Motors, specifically one of the biggest automotive makers in the world, hired their first female CEO. That was pretty big, because I think historically in a corporation of that size, I mean, they have never had a female CEO. So this is a whole new flair for one of the biggest corporations in the world, to bring that to the mix. And I was personally very excited about it because ever since that has happened, I think, General Motors specifically, has taken a more cordial, more creative approach to automotive in general. And that was, I think, much needed. It was just needed a different dynamic. So, but let's talk a little bit about personal development. I want to get your thoughts on personal development and entrepreneurship in life. What are maybe some suggestions, that you can share with the audience?
I think the first point to say is that the absolute and utter best investment that you can make is in yourself. And the way to do that is not necessarily to go and buy the flashy Aston Martin or whatever. It's a knowledge, because a good man can be wiped out 1,000 times, but what's in here in his mind will be his forever, or hers forever. That can never be taken. And so I always say that that's the investment that you really want to make. I think Warren Buffett said that it will pay the best dividend, and it's very, very true. I was fortunate enough to have my paths crossed with, as I said, Bob Proctor, and get that holistic approach. I mean, I think one of the things I also found out was that the difference between a coach and a mentor. A coach is very performance driven, so they will give you a specific task, and they will, in football or cricket or golf or whatever it is, it's a specific task, and they're trying to improve your golf swing or your goal scoring ability and so on. Whereas a mentor takes a more of a holistic approach and realizes that in order for you to change anything on the outside, whether that's your business, your life, your health, your relationships, you have to go inside and change it from within. And once that happens, everything outside starts to really come together. So really, I think it's very essential that we take that time and give it to ourselves and improve our ability. And then what you realize is that the growth curve will slowly start to accentuate towards you, and the results will start to come because you're improving the person that you are. And the other thing that I find is that there comes a point when all that knowledge in real life, but also personal development knowledge, it ends up becoming wisdom. So you then have this very calming effect on others and on yourself. And really, a better way of thinking is when you're calm. If you imagine there's all kind of rush and noise coming in at you, it's very difficult to sort of really focus and properly think and grow. This is why I think essential really to spend some time and investment in personal development, because you can't just pick up a few books and expect it to change. I mean, it will have a huge impact on you, but I always say, number one advice, if you ask me, Ivan, I would say to people, if you're interested in the subject of personal development, get mentored, find a mentor.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And when you were talking about knowledge and investing in yourself, one thing that I wanted to touch upon is just that, because you kind of talked about it indirectly, is the fact that knowledge is important. It's like, what you know is extremely important. Who you know matters too. But even then, what you know can be largely theoretical, because there's a lot of people that I know that read a lot of books and consume mass amount of information, but becoming practical and having experience around that paired with knowledge, I think speaks great volumes. Go ahead, Courtney.
I'm curious what your advice to people about finding a mentor is, because I think having the right mentor matters a lot. Talking about like who you know, right? I think not just any mentor. It's the fit is going to be pretty important. So how would you advise people to find a good mentor?
I think you have to do a bit of research, really, and you're absolutely right. If the personality fit has to be there, but ultimately, what you also want, I mean, these days, unfortunately, there's far too many 3-day certifications that people go on and then say, "Hey, I'm a coach, I'm a mentor." You need to basically do some proper research and ensure that they can really help you take you on that journey. Because the danger is that if you take somebody on and it isn't quite right, unfortunately, it would hamper your own confidence in the process.
Absolutely.
You've got to have faith in the process, because it isn't going to happen overnight, but they will help ask the right questions to you, which will in turn make you think purposefully and so on. I just say that you've got to do some research, have some interviews with them, and make sure that it syncs with you. That's going to be very essential when you work with them.
You were saying about coaches versus mentor. There is a difference between a coach and a mentor. And I think that's a distinction that a lot of people don't quite realize. What would you advise people about? I think it's pretty easy to kind of go online and find a coach, right? A lot of people are advertising for coaches, but how does one really go about finding a mentor specifically? That's a very specific kind of,
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. This is why I touched upon earlier, for people to realize that you shouldn't find a coach if what you're after is pure performance improvement. But if you're trying to have a holistic approach, then my suggestion really is, I think these days it's great that we've got internet on our hands, so you can certainly get the information and reach out and then try and have discussions and make sure that their values are aligned to yours. I think that was a very important thing for me when I started looking for one, that to ensure, I wrote down the things that I wanted to have help in. And then one of the key criteria was to ensure that their values and my values were sort of aligned. It's something that I do even now. I had the mentors before, but even now when I'm doing sort of businesses, I also take on mentors for that specific thing. We're working on on globalizing our business currently. And so we went ahead and looked for the right mentor to help us, and ideally these are the people who have done it. That's quite important. So in our business, I met Ken Minkus, who's been fantastic. He runs Industry Rockstar. They had already done their business in 32 countries. Now I'm trying to go into 20 countries, so this really sort of worked for me. So I decided to sort of work with them, and they were great, and their value system is quite in sync with me. But yeah, so I think that's essential to make sure that the value systems work.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And I would totally love to continue the conversation. I think, there's been so much great insight, that we talked about here. But, before we sign things off, Asif, let's tell everybody, the entire audience, how can they find you? Throw out some links, social channels. What's the best way to connect with you?
Sure. I think the best way is that you should go to my website, where you can find a lot about entrepreneurship, but also investments, because we do investments, as I talked about earlier. So if you have a great idea, feel free to pitch to us, and you'll find my social channels over there too. So the website address is asifm.world. That's ASIFM.world. And as I said, when you go there, you'll find everything else that you need in terms of Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on. So yeah, would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, this was a great conversation. I want to thank both of you, Courtney, as always, and Asif. Amazing conversation. And thank you so much for all the knowledge, all the education, and everyone that joined us on the live also, and anyone that's going to be listening also on the pre-recorded version. So thank you both again for coming on the episode. I really appreciate it.